This is your Chapter 1, Section 3 presentation. We are still in our discussion and our general overview of the political landscape here in the United States. The essential question and our specific goal today is to be able to answer the question, what does the American political culture entail, and what are the basic tenets of American democracy? Political culture generally is commonly shared attitudes, beliefs, and core values about how government should operate. The political culture is based on a number of underlying concepts and distinguishing characteristics that sometimes conflict with one another. So if it is a shared group of attitudes, belief, and core values about how the government should operate, that's with the understanding that, especially in a country like the United States, our views and our attitudes are going to vary, and therefore we're looking for where we can agree, or at least the majority of people can agree. The American political culture specifically emphasizes the values of liberty and equality, popular consent, majority rules, and popular sovereignty, individualism, and the religious faith and freedom. Obviously, there's varied understandings of these things, but as a general rule, most Americans would agree that these are important qualities of American government. We move on to the core political tenets of American democracy, what embodies that political culture. And we start with probably two of the more important and most accepted ones, although obviously, there are times where we don't live up to this. These are things that the Constitution encoded into our government, and most Americans strive to achieve and hope that we can achieve. The Constitution professes its purpose as ensuring life and liberty. But that said, the conception of personal liberty has changed over time. At the founding, it was freedom from government infringement, and it has changed now sort of at times to include not just freedom from, but also freedom to. What do I mean by that? Specifically, the definition kind of lays it out for you. A key characteristic of U.S. democracy, initially meaning freedom from government interference. Today, it includes demands for freedom to engage in a variety of practices without government interference or discrimination. So the framers sort of thought infringements by the government on religion, speech, unreasonable searches and seizures should be prohibited. But over time, things like the Fourth Amendment, the due process, interpretations of the Due Process Clause and equal protection, subsequent civil rights laws and liberties, later the 14th Amendment, expanded the concept of liberty to also include demands for freedom to go to work and school without discrimination, as well as a whole myriad of things within our society that are now supposed to be, at least ideally, are free from discrimination. There are still, however, conflicts, and there are still, however, moments where we don't quite meet these ideals. As far as conflicts, most of those arise as people debate how much the government should do to protect these rights and liberties. How much involvement should the government have? Political equality is the principle that all citizens are the same in the eyes of laws. Obviously, our notions of political equality have changed greatly over time. In an idealized version that's found in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, it sounds as though all people were meant to be equal. All people were viewed as equal by the law. Obviously, that's not the case at the founding. But hypothetically, at least, and hopefully, we are striving as a nation to be a place where political equality, where the political equality truly exists, and where all people, regardless of their distinguishing characteristics, are seen as equals in the eyes of the law. Again, we don't always meet these ideals, but that is the ideal. The next group of tenets, popular consent, majority rule, and popular sovereignty. Popular consent is the principle that government must draw their powers from the consent to be governed. All right, should remind you very quickly of the social contract theory. It is central to the Declaration of Independence. A citizen's willingness to vote represents consent to be governed. With that in mind, it is essential, and this is something that we struggle with in modern times, it is essential that people vote. Large numbers of non-voters can threaten the operation and legitimacy of a democratic system, because at that point, it's not clear whether in fact the government does have consent to govern. Majority rule is the central premise of direct democracy, in which only policies that collectively garner support of a majority of voters will be made into law. The American system also recognizes, however, because we are not a direct democracy and because we are a constitutional government, the need to preserve minority rights, and that's represented most clearly in the Bill of Rights. And then finally, popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty is the notion that the ultimate authority in society rests with the people. So this is based in part on natural law. Natural law is a doctrine that society should be governed by certain ethical principles that are part of nature and as such can be understood by reason. The idea that governments derive their power from the people is represented in the founding documents, but only came into wide use during the pre-Civil War era, as some debated that newly admitted states, based on their popular sovereignty, their freedom as newly admitted states, should be able to choose whether they wanted to be free or slave states, and that became a central argument that ultimately led to the great conflict of the Civil War. The next tenet of American democracy is individualism. In American democracy, great value is placed on the individual. This makes the U.S. quite different from other democracies, in Canada, for instance, which practice a group approach to governance. Group-focused societies like Canada try to improve the lives of citizens by making services and rights available on a group, or universal, that should say, basis. The U.S. system at its core believes that all individuals are deemed rational and fair and endowed with certain inalienable or unalienable rights. In other words, that people should have the freedom to make their choices, to make their lives better. Obviously, the political culture as it is, there are those who want to adopt a more group-focused, and those who want to go far the other way and ensure that it is a very individualistic society. And finally, the last tenet that we're going to discuss for Section 3, American political culture and the basic tenets of democracy, are religious faith and religious freedom. European religious conflicts drove many people to the New World. We already looked at that in Section 1. Religious conflict and intolerance, however, as people came here to the United States for that freedom, continued here. What that led to was the framers agreeing that the new nation had to be founded on notions of religious freedom. Religion is very important in the United States. There's an extraordinarily high percentage of people who consider them to be people of faith in the United States. But in order for all of these different people of different faiths to coexist, the government, if not the people themselves, must codify religious freedom, religious tolerance, and did so at the founding in the Constitution. That's it for Section 3, American political culture and the basic tenets of American democracy. At this point, you should go to the Google form, which is located on Google Classroom, and attempt to assess your ability to understand the essential questions for this section.